blessing and peace from God our Father and from our Lord and Savior Jesus the Christ. This morning we have Super Church, so there will be no children's sermon. If kids want to participate, if they're not already down, that's available to them. Fun time for the kids. It's an old story, isn't it? Old story. That story from Genesis. One of the oldest stories that humanity counts among its origins. It's a new story, too, playing itself out on a daily basis. It's our story. Everything was great, just as God intended. Perfect, in fact. We catch glimpses of that in our own lives. Those perfect days where not only is everything right outside, but inside too, we're just in the right place. Can you remember times like that? Hold on to them. Wish that they were more permanent. And then something goes wrong. Maybe under our control, maybe not. Maybe imposed upon us by somebody else or many somebodies. And all of a sudden that perfection, that glory, that peace is gone. As if it had never been. Adam and Eve, enjoying the garden together in that perfection of creation. With one, let's be clear about this, sisters and brothers, one limitation on their freedom. One check on their ability to do whatever they wanted. And that was one tree, of which they were not to eat. The tree of the knowledge, so the translation has come down to us, the knowledge of good and evil. But better we should say that the tree was the determination of good and evil, and that is, I will decide for myself. And so God said to his beloved creation, no, I've made those decisions for you. See this garden? See this perfection? It is good. Enjoy, because you are good. But there on the edge of their consciousness always lingered, what would it be like? You ever wonder that yourself? What would it be like? It's called temptation. Just want a little bit more information or experience. What would it be like? And sure enough, after a while, unable to ignore that which lingered on the edge of their consciousness and constantly drew their attention, Adam and Eve gave in to what we now call, in the history of our faith, original sin. Original not because it's that creative and thought up by Adam and Eve themselves in some new and innovative way, but original because it begins the whole slide of humanity in those origin stories that we call the Hebrew Scriptures in Genesis. Hey, says Eve or Adam one day, I have an idea. Let's try that one tree that God said we should leave alone. An original idea. An original idea played out over and over again in our experience as the children of God. I sometimes wonder as we speculate on this story, as we read the story from Genesis, which probably many of us know as well as we know our own names. Oh yes, the serpent tempted Eve. Eve ate from the apple or whatever the fruit was, but it must be an apple because we've been calling it an apple for so many generations. It must have been an apple or a pomegranate or whatever the heck it was. Doesn't really matter. Eve ate and tasted that it was good, maybe, or maybe she just didn't want to be alone with her newfound scary knowledge that she didn't need God at all, even though she did, but such is the corruption of some knowledge, that she wanted Adam to be with her. Is this a case of very early on, misery loves company? So she says to Adam, Adam, you eat too. This is really good stuff. Well, it actually isn't, Adam, but I don't want to tell you that because then you may not eat and you might not have the same experience that I have. And then we'll be separate. We'll be divided. So Adam, eat. So I'm not alone. Or did Adam eat first? The story tells us Eve to explain how we got to where we are today. More on that another day. In any case, Adam and Eve eat. And all of a sudden, what do they know? What is it that they now have that was so important that God said, you know, you don't need that. Well, now they have the ability, apart from their relationship with God, to determine what's good and what's bad, what's right and what's wrong. They can figure it out for themselves. They don't need God. In other words, after eating from the tree of the determination of good and evil, Adam and Eve might as well be atheists because they have everything that they need on their own. And so now, looking around at this perfection that God has created, both external to them and internal to them, integral to them in their very bodies that God has created and breathed into to give those bodies life, God's own breath animating clay to make this beautiful creation of human beings. Now that they can decide for themselves what's right and what's wrong, they look at their very selves, created, I will remind you, in the image of God, and they decide, oh, it's ugly and embarrassing, and I have to hide myself. Not that original, is it? Something we all struggle with, whether it's our physical bodies or our emotional state or our spiritual well-being or who we are fundamentally as individuals. We look at this creation of God and we say, contrary to God's wisdom and love and grace, it is not good. There's too much wrong in here or out here or around here or around here. And so we will hide. You want to know how corrupt Adam and Eve's thinking had become? They decide to hide from God. That's silly, isn't it? Where are you going to hide from God? How can you hide from God? But despite the reality, we keep trying. Maybe God won't notice. Maybe God will look at someone else and pay no attention to us. Maybe in the scale of sinfulness, if we're somewhere, I don't know, below the halfway mark, God will never make it through that first half of the list to get to our sins, our weaknesses, our shames, and therefore we can hide. And by the time the roll call is done, God will be so tired that we'll just slip in. Maybe behind somebody else. Hide from God. So corrupted was their thinking when they got to think completely for themselves, independent of their relationship with God, that they thought they could hide. And I love the story where God plays along. Right? Isn't that cool? Did you notice that? God comes walking in the garden and God says, Adam, where are you? It's a joke. God knows where Adam is. Adam doesn't know. Neither does Eve. They think they're okay hiding from God. And God confronts them right away. Who told you? And think about that question, right? God says, Adam, where are you? And Adam says, I was hiding from you because I was naked and I was ashamed. And God very subtly asks this question, right? Who told you that you were naked? But that's not really the question, is it? The question is, who told you that that was something to be ashamed of? Where did you get that idea, Adam? What happened to you? Where are you now? What happened to that moment of perfection? The enjoyable garden and the company of Adam and Eve and me and all creation. What broke that, Adam? Who told you that all this was bad? Because it's not true. Well, as I said at the beginning, there was really nothing original about that sin because we continue to commit it on a daily basis. It's maybe one of the most fundamental parts of our fallen human nature, as we call it theologically, that we're no longer who God intended us to be because of our own actions. Let's remember that these stories in Genesis are origin stories. That what the poet in Genesis is writing is an analysis of life as it is and saying, how the heck did things get this way? If we have a good God, why does everything look so messy? I know, says the poet, it was something like this. And whether or not the story is scientifically true, and I don't even think we have to debate that, because if we debate the scientific truthfulness of Genesis, we miss the theological truthfulness of that story. We miss the deep analysis of our human condition that the poet understood in his or her own flesh and bones. That we live in a situation of brokenness. Yesterday, Marianne and I, with Luke and Jenna and a couple of friends, had the privilege of going to see the Belmont Stakes. Triple Crown, pretty cool. Watched the American Pharoah come in like 5.5 lengths before the next horse.
The ice cream is coming down.
Got some betting advice from my father-in-law. Won no money, in case you're thinking we're going to pay for the new roof, just to make that clear. The New York Racing Authority decided to cap the attendance at Belmont Park at 90,000 people. But we couldn't tell the difference. There might as well have been 200,000 people, because it took us an hour and a half to get out of the parking lot. Have you ever been stuck in a parking lot for an hour and a half? You don't want to have that experience. 2 hours and 45 minutes on Wednesday. What a great week we had on the bridge. Now, the only difference, perhaps, between your experience and ours was that, hopefully, in your experience, you lacked the ingredient of an abundance of alcohol. Have mercy, sisters and brothers. The beer was flowing before the races even started. Now, take people who have consumed an abundance of alcohol, present company excluded for the record. It might have helped, to be honest with you. And put them in SUVs. This is a formula for destruction. No bathrooms. Sure that any minute the lane is going to open up, and then the guy behind you decides that he really needs to be in front of you, where there's no place to go. Talk about the brokenness in our world. Talk about the insanity. Talk about people not treating each other with love and grace, but wanting to wring one another's throats. At least we could introduce ourselves first. But it was just this sheer sense of frustration and anger. Mind you, for what it's worth, we had just seen American Pharoah win the Triple Crown. First Triple Crown winner in 37 years. That's pretty cool, right? Except all that gets forgotten when you're waiting in traffic for an hour and a half and not moving out of the parking lot, and you have to be somewhere. Are we broken? Are we fallen from our relationship with God and one another? We absolutely are, and that's just one reminder of the reality of that. And I must confess to you, all things considered, a mild one at that. Because I stand before you today to tell the tale with no damage on our car or anybody else's that we had anything to do with that. Thanks be to God, because there were moments when we were close. What difference did it make? What did it matter? Was it that great a sacrifice, an hour and a half? In the midst of it, we lose sight of things. Because in my own thinking, apart from God, I had determined that this was bad. Bad. And it probably was. Maybe God thought so too, but in the great scheme of things, not that important. And yet, who was I thinking of at that moment? Well, me, of course. As I say, a small example of our brokenness. And we get so frustrated and angry at the assaults on our space, on our well-being, on our patience. A mild example of the things we suffer every day by being ashamed of our nakedness, our vulnerability, or just being the people God created us to be, and looking only at the fallenness and the brokenness and missing the glory and the perfection that God created into us, that God breathed into us with God's own self. I think that's so amazing. So God creates this creature out of clay. And then God breathes into it. No bicycle pump, no big balloon respirator thing. God's own breath breathed into the human being to give that human being, you and me, life and spirit. And so often then we wrestle with this sin that is not at all original. So what's to become of us? What happens now? Are we stuck in this terrible circle of the same thing over and over and over again. And just when we think we've made it, we're okay, we've got it, we lose it again. Because of a simple thing, like somebody cutting you off in traffic, or the government enacting another rule or regulation that you don't understand but have to follow, lest the legal penalties occur. Or you name whatever your particular hurt or frustration or anxiety is. Jesus is preaching to the crowds, doing wonderful things, bringing the power of the Father into the midst of the people who are the most vulnerable, the most naked, if you will, the most oppressed. And seeing what he's doing, his family says, uh-oh, he's gone off the deep end. As a friend of ours used to say, he thinks who the heck he is. Whatever that really means. So family comes because that was the mental health system at the time. Your family would come and take you home and make sure that they kept an eye on you. So family comes to bring Jesus home. And if he doesn't get back into his right mind, they'll just take care of him. Into the midst of that situation, Jesus also confronts the religious authorities, who were pretty much also the political authorities of his day. Make no mistake, when those scribes come, when those religious authorities come from Jerusalem to check him out, he's under serious threat, as we will find out later on, or as he already knows. And so they say, he's working for the enemy. He's working for the competition. He's doing this stuff because he's under the control of Beelzebub, the devil. Thankfully, Jesus questions that whole understanding of who he is, both on the part of his family and on the part of the authorities who are supposed to know. And he says, wait a minute, how could that be? Why would Beelzebub ransack his own house? No, if Beelzebub's house is being ransacked, it's got to be by the opposition. That is, it has to be godly. And he says, in a parable, no one can plunder the house of a strong man unless he first binds that strong man. The one who plunders. You think it's interesting, by the way, just as an aside or something to ponder on the rest of the day, you think it's interesting that one of the chief images Jesus uses for himself in the Gospels is that of a thief, a burglar, a housebreaker. He says, no one can plunder the house of a strong man unless he first binds that strong man. And the implication is that Jesus is the plunderer, the one who comes in and binds the strong man. That is, if you will, the personification of all our weakness and frustration and evil and anger and hatred, which takes its form in the shape of the devil. That Jesus binds the strong man so that we might again experience the love and grace of God in our lives. And it occurs to me that part of our discipleship, part of what we are called to do as followers of Jesus is to bind the strong man. To bind the strong man within us that has a negative voice and a hopeless future and tells us, you're naked, hide, you're vulnerable, be careful, people are out to get you. Worse than that, God is out to get you. Part of our discipleship as followers of Jesus is to, according to his example, bind the strong man within us and tell those voices that sense that it is not right. That this determination that we are bad, not worthy, is only partly true because of that original sin, but not the last word. And because of that, we have strength to live a life of faith. That from the moment, and the next moment, and the next moment, that we allow the Spirit of Christ into our lives, we no longer hide. We realize that we are God's created children. And that that's good. That we don't allow that original sin, which we repeat over and over and over again, to be louder than the voice of God, who, when God on that sixth day creates humanity, says not just it's good, but this creation is very good. because of the presence of these, my best. Sisters and brothers, your job, if you will, your calling, the grace lived out in your life is to bind the strong man as you find that strong man wreaking havoc in your own life and the lives of others. Our responsibility as a community of faith is to bind the strong man, to take away his power so that we might plunder his house and take away all those things that that strong man is doing to oppress God's best creation. And whether that means marching in the streets for climate change, or making donations to the many causes that we support as a congregation, or hearing the words "it is very good" spoken over you, being reminded of your baptismal claim that you belong to God in a way that will never, ever change, then that's your responsibility and your calling to bind the strong man. To remember your baptism, to reach out to those in need, to pray for the sick, to support the grieving, to transform this world, beginning with you. We don't have to do it anymore. It's not that original. Let's move on, shall we? From this life of fallen human nature, and each day grow more and more into the image of Christ within us. A last image for you. I'll fill your head with images this morning, and try and forget the whole Belmont parking lot. That's not what I'm going to carry with it, right? But you want to think about the image of Jesus as a thief who breaks in and plunders Satan's house. You want to think about that image of Adam and Eve walking peacefully in the garden with God. And finally, an image that St. Paul uses often in his writing to Christians of his time. He says that within us lies the old Adam. But notice that Paul puts that adjective on there. He says the old Adam. Because Adam is old and passing away. And that Paul says alongside and stronger than that old Adam within you is the new Christ. Grow, Paul says, into the image